This podcast is part of the Batman Universe Podcast Network, hosted by the BatmanUniverse.net. Check out everything related to Batman and the entire Bat family at the BatmanUniverse.net, including news and original content related to comics, movies, television, merchandise, video games, and more. Also, check out some of the other unique podcasts that TBU has to offer. Consider supporting this podcast by becoming a patron on Patreon. Even $1 can go a long way in supporting this content that you enjoy. Look for a link over at the BatmanUniverse.net to offer your support now. And now, on with the show.
In 2008, a podcast was created with one goal: to bring Bat fans around the world news related to movies, comics, video games, television, merchandise, and so much more. And now, the Batman Universe Podcast has returned.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest TBU podcast. I'm Dustin, and joining me today is Scott, BJ, Hannan, and a special guest host, Theo from the Comic Cast is joining us as well, because today we are talking all about our first reactions to the Batman film. As I've said on earlier episodes before we release this, we're going to be talking about the Batman film for a good, maybe the entire month of March, but we're definitely going to be talking about it for at least the next couple weeks. So this specific episode, we're talking about our first reactions. We've all seen the film. We've all haven't seen it at least once. Some of us have seen it more than once, including myself. But those of us that we've all enjoyed the film as a whole. But today we're specifically talking about whether or not, what were the things that we liked, what were some of the things that we disliked, if there were any things that you disliked. That's what we're specifically focusing on this episode. In the future, we will have other episodes dedicated to some of the comic connections, a lot more of the Easter eggs, a little bit of a deep dive into a lot of the Easter eggs, because there's a ton in there. And then also we're going to be talking about the sequel ideas, or ideas for the future of the franchise as we leave it at the end of this. I say this specifically because one of the things I did not want to talk about today was sequels, because as of we're recording this, Rataalada.com is still loading. It's currently sitting at 34%, and who knows what's actually going to pop up after that, after it finally gets to 100%. But if you sat through the end credits and you saw the question mark and the word goodbye, you saw the website, Rataalada, which is the same place where a lot of the viral marketing has been taking place leading up to the film. The website itself flashed, and if you went there before March 4th and you went to the website, it was still doing the same thing where it was showing riddles, and you'd solve the riddles and you get some sort of like concept or a little behind the scenes image when it comes to like mug shots of Batman, or a ad for the Thomas Wayne mayoral campaign and things like that. But overall, as soon as March 4th hit, suddenly the website updated, and it makes it seem like it's going through, the entire site is being rerouted through Gotham, a bunch of different ISPs, and then into Arkham, and then there's another page that loads and says, click here for reward. You click it, and it's another ciphered message that translates to, you think that was something big, I've got something bigger in plan for the future. Obviously, that's not the exact words, but it's pretty much setting up the future to have something else incorporated with the Riddler, and there's something loading, and it's been loading since that specific day when the website updated. So now it's sitting at 34%. By next weekend, I'm sure it'll be at 100%, but for now it's still loading, so that's one of the reasons I didn't want to talk about sequels today. But there's a lot of different things to talk about. I've already asked and discussed with everyone here whether they liked or disliked the film, and everyone said overall they liked the film, but there are some things that we dislike. So I wanted to, instead of diving straight into the likes and then ending the episode on the dislikes, I'm going to go reverse. There's a lot of things to talk about. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, there's going to be plenty of spoilers here, so I assume you've already seen the film if you're listening to the podcast. But if you haven't seen the movie, just be warned that there's going to be plenty of spoilers here. So I want to talk about some of the dislikes. What was one of the things that you disliked about the film?
Surprising lack of Alfred, and I was actually really excited to see Andy Serkis play him because he's a really talented actor. So expecting more Alfred involvement, although I really did like the scene that he has with Bruce. I thought that was really sweet. Kind of on the same lines as the Wayne Tower, but it took me by surprise that there was no Wayne Manor. I was expecting the pretty stereotypical like manor and then go down to the Bat Cave outside of the city limits. But from what I saw from the film, it looked like he drove straight through to the city and then to the main tower, and then that's where they resided. I actually loved the interior. I thought it was so ridiculous, but kind of liked the surprise of it. But not having like the Wayne Manor setting. And I think the last thing I would say that I was hoping for perhaps a different ending in the sense of like, okay, so the Riddler's in custody and the big plan is then to destroy the city by setting off bombs at locations that would destroy a dam. And I'm not an engineer, so I could be so wrong, but I don't think that's how dams work. I think that they're built a little bit better. There's more fail-safes in place if you're that low underwater, under sea level. And then like massive flooding, wouldn't there be severe casualties like across the board? That part I was kind of like, oh, I didn't see that coming and was expecting it to go maybe in a different direction. And I think that would be like the last thing that caught me off guard. I wouldn't say it's a huge dislike. I wasn't upset with it, but it didn't satisfy me as much as I would have hoped.
So I can't speak to the engineer side of it, but I know that I saw that there was in the very early of the film, there was after the mayor's found and they're walking around the mayor's office or den or whatever it is, and they are looking, and on one of the newspapers on the wall, it's like Maroney drug bust, mayor bust drugs or whatever. And there's a sub headline at the bottom of one of those newspapers, which I don't know that a normal person, I do not see actually catching this because it's just, it was not very big and I did not see it. And I'm not trying to take credit for seeing it either because I saw this on a recap video, but one of the sub headlines was seawall construction delayed. So I think it leads into the fact that the infrastructure that the renewal plan and all of that was supposed to do was supposed to help the infrastructure, because the whole idea of the renewal was the public works. That's what the foundation was intended for, was for that. So I think that the seawall construction being halted led the seawall that existed to not be in great form. So I think that's why it was so easy to put the bombs. It could have been better explained, but I don't think, I don't know that a lot of people are, I should say a lot of average people are thinking too far into the construction element of whether or not the seawall is going to have a failsafe or not. But I agree in the sense of at the end, like obviously Batman saves all the people. They get to the Gotham Square, saves a bunch of people, I should say. But at least when the water is like gushing through the city, it seems as if the water is at least coming up to at least one story. Because we know that Gotham Square Garden is dead center in the city, and that's supposed to be their last. The mayor puts it as like it's supposed to be like the place for a natural disaster, a haven of sorts, and so that it's supposed to be able to like withstand this. And they were like, yes, it is supposed to withstand like a hurricane or earthquake, right, or whatever, but it's not necessarily designed to stand, when we have water coming in from every end very, very quickly. And I keep thinking to myself that could have been explained a little bit better, because we literally see the water like gushing through the streets, so much so that it's like moving cars and moving buses and whacking into the side of, yeah, exactly. And they don't really address the fact that there clearly would be people like walking around the city or on the first levels of all of these buildings, and that just kind of gets glossed over because, well, everybody they want to matter is all at the Gotham Square Garden, where Batman conveniently saves everyone. So
Because I think they would have achieved the same end goal of like causing havoc if they had just planted bombs around the city and let them rip, and then have the people approach to the store garden and still attempt to kill the people who were present.
Yeah,
and still have the same like epic fight
without the
scene
water.
Point, just without the flooding.
That was easy for me to comprehend and understand, and I say that as someone born and raised in New Orleans who lives, under sea level. So basically, the way these seawalls, as they're called outside of the South, are built, we call them levees down here, is, they're built to hold water back. But what happens is the area that it protects, and New Orleans, again, is a prime example of it, because of that wall that's built around it, the city actually sinks some. And so now you have a city that is basically living within a bowl. So once that water starts rushing in, no matter which way it comes from, it's going to rush in and it's going to stay there. Okay. So that's why days and days later, unless you find a way to pump that water back out, it's going to be sitting. And that's kind of what we saw there. And so, and that's, and I immediately, so I'm like, oh, they got Gotham looking like, the city of New Orleans, with the seawall built around it, that basically makes it a bowl. Once water comes in, it has nowhere to go. It's going to sit there once it rushes in on you.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Sorry, I didn't mean to get us off on like a
no.
tangent.
No.
The last thing I would say, and I can't quite recall if I've already mentioned it, but it's when Bruce Wayne finds out the truth of like, oh, my dad was corrupt and this whole thing happened with my family. He believes it on instinct, or at least that's the impression that you receive. Like, he believes that is the truth, goes and talks to a corrupt mob boss, and then, like, here's what he has to say, and is like, yeah, that's accurate. And then goes to Alfred and is like, you lied to me. I would have appreciated a little bit like, I'm a detective. Is that really what happened? Let me talk to Alfred first before jumping to conclusions and, kind of the villainizing of the Wayne family. But aside from those areas, and they really didn't bother me as much as I expected them to, I would say those were like the main points that I disliked.
I will say, I guess that leads into the likes too, but that element, it was weird how easily Bruce just accepted something that a known criminal was telling him. That part was a little frustrating because it's like, he just didn't put it together that maybe the criminal's not exactly the most trustworthy person that he could talk to. That said.
And it wasn't the first time either, because I bust out laughing when he was speaking with Riddler, and Riddler was like, you didn't figure it out, world's greatest detective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was that, but then on the flip side, jumping over to the likes, obviously there was a lot of detective elements here, which makes perfect sense. So years ago when the Dark Knight trilogy was coming out, Dark Knight had already released. They were leading up to The Dark Knight Rises. On the podcast years ago, I said that it would be really cool to see a Riddler based in the grounded reality of Chris Nolan's universe, specifically because I thought it would be really cool to get a more cerebral Batman that would have to deal with the Riddler. Because, one, Jim Carrey's, that's its own thing. We don't need to talk about a whole lot of that right now, but Jim Carrey's Riddler is extremely different and was not really set in a very grounded reality. So I always really wanted to see that. And I remember leading up to the rumors of what exactly they were going to do for The Dark Knight Rises, I was really hoping for the Riddler to be one of the villains that would be featured in the film. And then when it wasn't, it wasn't meant to be. But going into this film, I didn't even have any real expectations of what I wanted to see. I just wanted to see something good, honestly. I didn't have, like, it needs to be this or it needs to be that. It doesn't, like, if they decided to do something that wasn't as grounded, I don't think I would have been as upset about it as long as it was a good film. And I'm not trying to cast shade on Batman v Superman, but I just don't think overall that film was, like, it had great moments. There was great moments in that film, but I think overall it was just not a great movie. and that's my issue with it. And I prefer to have a movie that is overall very good, that maybe doesn't have as many like of the holy crap moments as certain films do. But I want something that's, like a perfect comparison, because I just watched this last night. The Fast and the Furious movies. Those movies started off as like all about car races and heists. And now it's, how can we top the last crazy special effect that we did in the last film? And it doesn't make a good movie. The movies now are just, it's just about, what can we do different? What's bigger? What's better than the last one? But it's not about whether or not the story's good. So for me, it's all about whether or not the story's good. And with this film, that's really my one hope going into this. So when they announced that the Riddler was going to be it, I was thrilled for the fact that the Riddler was going to be the villain, because I thought to myself, okay, well, we're getting a different take on the Riddler, and I think the Riddler is a villain that deserves to be in live action just as much as the Joker. Probably, I shouldn't say not as much as the Joker, but right up there with, the top tier group of villains that, belong in live action. So I was pleased to see that, but knowing that Matt Reeves came from the previous franchise that he worked on, Planet of the Apes, which for more than one reason I really enjoyed. But there was, and he already had stated that he was going to be doing a grounded version of Batman. And I thought, okay, well, Batman v Superman, it wasn't as much as not grounded as it was. It just took place in a world that had heroes that were very different than Batman. So I guess that was, it's a different take from that direction, but it's very similar to Chris Nolan. So then it comes down to, what were they going to do different than Chris Nolan did? And what they ended up doing was something that was much more cerebral, much more detective, more so than just the brute force of Chris Nolan's Batman. And there's still plenty of action. There's still plenty of moments that are really cool, but the detective element that comes into play when it comes into all the stuff that's going on with the Riddler and solving the mystery of the Waynes and Falcone, that was the part that I probably liked the absolute most compared to anything else. There's plenty of moments that I'll bring up in a little bit, but that was the aspect that I really enjoyed, was seeing a character, even as early in his career as he is, he's still very much like in on the detective side of things. And that is something that we can see built on in the future too. It's not something that can just be exclusive to this one incarnation of one film. It can be in multiple films, because that's the character that they started out with.
I agree. I loved the detective element, and I was so happy early in the film when we saw Bruce take off those contacts. We talked about it last week on the last episode of the podcast, how Bruce Wayne, Batman, he's always building his own tech, and we finally saw him with some futuristic tech we really haven't seen in movies past. I love that he had there was like newer tech that hooked up to like older tech to look like he had like an old like Macintosh computer that he was like rewinding, going back and forth and figuring out the cipher and everything. So I really we finally got the true detective Batman in the movie.
I really like that. They kind of he just went for it, though, like on that note, like with the detective thing, like, he's like, I like, these types of films or this kind of vibe or feel. He just kind of like just owned it. And, the first time watching it, it took me a few minutes to get into the movie because it was, very reminiscent of like older film styles in the sense of just like, it took place in a world that we don't see too much, I would say, in like modern like blockbusters. So, I just love that, like, he just kind of went for it. And, like, I guess, like, I wouldn't use the word grounded to describe it on that note. I guess to me, like, grounded means, like, Christopher Nolan's like, oh, well, he's a real man, so Batman's got knee problems or something. But I felt like it was just kind of its own unique world, where Gotham just feels like this labyrinthian, place that's kind of surreal, and I don't want to say magical because that hits the wrong note, but just like, it's huge, and there's all these corridors and, shadowy areas, and just, I love that, when he was leaning into the detective thing, he really just kind of owned, almost like those like old noir films he was going for, that inspired him. And it just, feels so unique in its own thing and different than everything else that's like in the theaters at the moment.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I love the vibe that the whole movie had. Kind of a poor word to use, but kind of what you're describing, like a mythos to the city, the plastered plasma screens, but then the like almost Victorian-esque style of buildings, European inspired, but in America, and old technology, old cars, but it's very clearly modern day. And there was a really nice blend and a really nice mesh of all that. And I think it just created a really good setting for the entire detective story to play out. And you see that. And I loved how that was really highlighted through, Batman's work, but then also him and Jim Gordon going at it and their dynamic together at that, and how it all really, really helped support the film. I thought that was really cool.
The most detective thing for me was watching him have these notebooks filled with all these notes from the cases that he's done in such a short period of time in his career. As he's going case by case and he's taking notes to go back and study on. And that was detective for me. He doesn't have all the pieces together, but at least he has a trail to go back to if he ever needs to go back to it. And I thought that was just absolutely great. Yeah, but again, as the person who reviews tech on the website, one of the things I always love is a true Batman detective story, and this was it, true and true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The one thing I will say about
dumb watching it at points, I was like, what? Oh, like not getting it, and like the URL part. Somebody leaned over and they're like, no, it's like URL, like a website, and I was like, I would have died.
I will say the one downfall about him handwriting all his journals is that it would take him a really long time to be able to reference his notes as often as he's going out. You would think he would digitize that stuff in today's world.
Maybe he just scans it and then it's just like.
That's true. Maybe he does. Maybe he just runs it. Maybe that's what Alfred's job is, and we never see him. He's always in the back room scanning everything, digitizing.
He looks at it. He looks at it with the contact and then prints it out.
Ah, yeah, there we go. But so there's a couple of other things. So the overall setting, it was interesting because there was when it came to Gotham City, it was not a Gotham City that we've really seen in the past. Chris Nolan's Gotham City was very much Chicago, and then obviously when they did Dark Knight Rises, they showed elements, because they filmed in Pittsburgh, of Pittsburgh to kind of make it a little bit different than what we saw in Batman Begins and in The Dark Knight. But when it comes to Gotham City, this was a very different Gotham City. There was very distinct districts, which I thought was interesting. So in the very beginning of the film, we see, when the mayor's house is in this nicer area, or you assume it's a nicer area, but it is in kind of a borough. It's not necessarily in the downtown area, because after the whole opening sequence, when Batman leaves the house and they're giving the press conference, Bruce gets on the motorcycle and he drives through, and you see him traveling through Gotham City, and he goes through an area that appears to be very similar to like Times Square, like the main center of the city. But what was really interesting, and when I saw this with my wife, she called this out. She was like, where did they film this? Because it was interesting, because that city center, which is so modern with the giant billboards and everything, had cobblestone roads. And I thought that was really unique, because it shows there's this really like rooted history of the town that still exists to this day, even in an area that is so heavily modernized with these giant digital billboards everywhere. There was still the cobblestone roads. And then he gets on a bridge, travels over the bridge, and he's in a completely different area of the city where Wayne Tower is, and there's other skyscrapers there as well. And it doesn't seem to be as bustling as the area that the mayor was in, or even the area where the town square was. It seemed more isolated, even though there was those giant skyscrapers. And that's not to say there wasn't, but it also leads me to believe that, like, obviously Wayne Tower, because the first thing I thought about when the seawall broke in the flooding, I was like, oh, well, there goes the Batcave because that's in the basement of Wayne Tower, but that's on a different, that's on a different island as part of Gotham City. So it's not affected by that specific one because it's just one element of it. But yeah, the overall like setting, the uniqueness of it being filmed. The film was filmed. The majority of the city sequences and things were filmed in Scotland, and you can see that European element to the setting, even though it is obviously a town that's meant to be in America, but it has that old feel, that old English kind of feel that we see when in the film when we see it on the screen. So I thought the setting was really unique.
Yeah, something else I really liked, honestly, Jim Gordon's characterization, is probably, as far as films go, that's probably my favorite one. Like, I can say that, like, hands down. I loved, that we get more of him, that, here's kind of this honest, friendly, sincere face. In a way, he's serving as kind of like the Robin to Batman, but at the same time, he feels almost like paternal in a way where he's participating alongside, and he's more reserved and kind of seeing how the pieces fit together. And I really appreciated that we get a Gordon who is not relegated as only when he's needed or shoved to the side, kind of like how Pat Hingle was in those early ones in the late 80s and early 90s, but that there was a lot of time and effort put into making this more of a character in a way that like shows the alliance between Batman and the GCPD. Eventually, we'll see that grow, obviously, probably as the films continue. But
I really liked his character as well. And then that one scene where they're in the police station, and he like gets right in Batman's face, and he's like, "Dude, calm down." like that. You're mentioning paternal, kind of like a child, like get it together now. And I was like, this is great. I really liked his characterization on that one too.
Jim Gordon probably did more police work than any of the others, and that includes Gary Oldman in the Nolan trilogy, because for the most part, he was leading the other cops in the trilogy, whereas in this one, he's a lieutenant throughout the entire movie, so he's more of a street cop, a beat cop. As a detective, so he's at the scene, working the scenes, and it's just funny how he just brings Batman right on in. What type of Gotham have we seen that before?
Yeah. The one of the sequences, it's the sequence where they're going into the mayor's garage and they're walking through, and he's like, "Where did you get this information?" He's like, "I've got a source," and he's like, "Who's your source?" He's like, "What? You don't trust me?" He's like, "Yeah, why would I trust you? I've known you for 2 years and I still don't know who you are." And I thought like just the banter that they had between each other, it's not something that we're used to, but it's not something I have a problem with at all. I thought it was really cool to see that like relationship between them, because I think I mentioned this to Scott before, which is, this feels like the Jim Gordon that would sit down and have a coffee with Batman on New Year's Eve like we see in the animated series. This is that Jim Gordon. This is not the Jim Gordon that, just is around, who, flakes out on whatever Batman's telling him to do. And I say that because like, I like The Dark Knight, but one of the sequences that I have such a problem with is they build this relationship between Gary Oldman's Jim Gordon and Batman. And then as soon as Batman's like, this is what needs to happen, Jim Gordon starts questioning everything. He starts questioning, no, we need to save Harvey Dent. We need to save Harvey Dent. We're going to do this. And then he's like, no, I'm going to go take care of this. And then he's like, no, SWAT team's going in 5 minutes. It doesn't matter what Batman's saying. He's making his own decisions based off of whatever he needs to do. This Jeffrey Wright's Jim Gordon is not like that. Jeffrey Wright's Gordon is going to do exactly what Batman tells him to do, because he has seen Batman and he knows how Batman works, and he knows Batman can get things taken care of. And I appreciate that. I'm sure that's probably why there will be friction in the future if eventually he becomes commissioner within the movies. There's going to be some friction between that and like the mayoral office, because Jim Gordon's just like, Batman is the way we fix everything. We cannot do it ourselves. He has to be able to do things outside of what we can do. And I can see, like, I immediately see them just like sitting down and having a cup of coffee. I mean, if Riddler wasn't in that diner, maybe they could have gone and had a cup of coffee.
Yeah, my favorite line, he's like, no guns. He's like, dude, that's your thing.
Yeah.
So that little chat right there. It felt really natural and not forced.
Yeah.
Towards the end, when Batman thinks that Riddler's going to out him as Bruce Wayne, before he leaves to go to talk to Riddler, and he just looks at Gordon, goes, "You're a good cop," and then just leaves. And you can kind of tell on like Gordon's face, he's like, "Oh, that kind of like meant a lot to him." So that was a really nice moment.
Yeah. And I think that specifically obviously happened because Batman really thought he was going to be done. He thought he was going to be outed, and he thought that was the end of it. But it was a good moment. So let's talk about the Riddler here. Overall, I thought the way they did the Riddler was a good way. I saw some reviews online that were talking about how they expected the Riddler to kind of like be way more leaning into the conspiracy, like QAnon or something like that. And I was like, I don't know why you would try to bring in, like, there was already the element of he is this leader who's got followers. He has a bunch of people who have no problem, listening to what he's saying. I think one of the problems that I saw that some of the reviewers online had was that they weren't sure why exactly all of the followers had to dress up like Riddler at the end of the film. And I was like, I mean, I guess they're trying to mimic their leader. That's what they're trying to do. It's not so much about, because the reviewer that I read, it was like, oh, well, they're just basically, it's like a cosplay convention where they just happen to bring guns and they're trying to kill people. And I was like, that's a weird way of putting that. I don't know that I would immediately associate cosplayers and, gun-toting murderers together, but sure. But it's obvious that they did it, but...
Well, I mean, like, it's obvious that's inspired by a lot of things going on now, but, like, as far as, like, all these, like, movements or, like, these groups that it takes inspiration from, like, they might not all wear the same exact shirt and pants, but they do wear matching t-shirts, they bring flags, like, there are things that they bring to their little rallies or get-togethers, that are similar, so they look alike and they can tell each other apart. Like, that's not, I don't see that as outside the realm of possible. It's not a deal breaker for me, I guess is the best way to put it. It makes sense because they are this Riddler movement.
Yeah. And also, too, it feels very DC. Like, how many comics have we all read where it's like the mob gathering and the cult of the Cobra, right? They're all wearing the same thing. The Joker henchmen, all wearing the same thing. Like, it's even some of the Batman books, The Dark Knight Returns, right? At the end, like, they all get together and they're like all wearing the same face paints or masks and stuff. It's such a DC thing. So for me, it felt totally normal.
Yeah. And I think but going back to the Riddler, some of the riddles felt a little cheesy. I don't know how you guys felt. I'm not saying that as a negative, but like, there's always this thing that always happens with riddles that I dislike so much, but it's mostly because I'm very like practical. I'm not so much about thinking outside the box kind of thing. So when you say to me, the case in point, one of the riddles, what's blue, black, and dead all over? And obviously Riddler's answer is Batman, but that is not a real riddle. That's not a riddle at all. That's just a random like joke riddle that applies to the person you're talking to because the person you're talking to is what you're referring to. But like some of the other riddles that happen, it's not so much that they don't work. They work, but it's a matter of like, how do you solve it? The URL one is kind of interesting because like it all is the letters. If he would have figured it out sooner, we would not have gotten the awesome chase scene that we got, which I'll bring up in a minute. But the URL, like I wouldn't have necessarily put it together until he actually spelled it out because I didn't really like catch it when they actually had it written on the piece of paper to go to that website. But, bring Falcone into the light. Conveniently, there just happened to be a light post there that was the reference when he got shot and Batman looked up and he's like, oh crap, I brought him into the light. but really he meant just bring him out of his hole that he's hiding in. But the thing is, he did come out. He came out for the funeral, so it wasn't like he never came out. So if the whole point was that Riddler just couldn't get him to come directly outside of that one spot where his gun happened to be set up, I don't know that it would have worked as well. But so that's the thing that I have an issue with, and that goes back to like every Riddler incarnation. Every Riddler always ends up having some sort of weird, twisted riddle that's like, it could be a riddle. To me is like there's one answer. There's not multiple answers. It's not multiple choice. There's one specific answer that you get. That's the only way you can solve it, is by coming up with that one answer. If you can answer it with like 15 other things, then what is the point of the riddle? It doesn't, to me, that doesn't make any sense. So like, that's my issue with riddles in general, but I didn't necessarily have a problem with a lot of them, because some of them, it was just like thinking a different way than what you come up with. It wasn't just about deciphering it and getting something specific. It's how do you use that information to come up with the actual answer, and that's fine. But yeah, in general, Riddler riddles they really mess with my head. I just think too much about them.
I just thought they were overly simplistic, that they were meant to be solved, and they were meant to be solved in a particular way to get to a particular scene to get us to the ending that it got us to. And I would have preferred if it would have been something a little bit more thought intuitive, that would have really added to the detective vibe of the movie. But I just saw them as being very simplistic, where you can either come up with a very easy answer, or it could have been any type of answer, and they all would have fit.
Yeah, and the other issue is there was the point in the film where he goes and he talks to Riddler, and Riddler's like, "Oh, you didn't figure it out. You're not as bright as I thought." And Batman goes back, and he happens to have that tool that was used to kill the mayor, and the cop is like, "Oh yeah, that's a carpet tucker. That's used to tuck carpet." So Batman uses it to pry up the wood to pull back the carpet, and then it reveals this map that's kind of etched into the floor and says real change. And that just happens to be the password to type it in to be able to see what the followers are saying to lead up to where they're going. And I'm sitting here thinking like, okay, how many different pieces of the puzzle would have to like match up perfectly in order for Batman to realize what that carpet tucker thing is, in order to be able to know to pull up the carpet in the apartment, to be able to get a password that connects to the computer that leads him to go here. Like, there's so many pieces of the puzzle that just have to like line up perfectly. And the planning that goes into that, like Riddler, how could he possibly anticipate? Like, obviously he wants his stuff. He wants to stump Batman. That's like his thing, not necessarily in this film, because his whole gimmick is that he believes that he's working alongside Batman to make things better. But in general, when it comes to the Riddler, his whole shtick is that he's smarter than Batman. He wants to prove that he's smarter than Batman. But in this case, he's not trying to be smarter. He's trying to lead Batman down the path of like helping solve the problems that they need to solve, which is fine. But there was that carpet thing got to me, because I was like, why? Like, I didn't know what it is, and I actually work with carpet. I don't have something specifically like that, and I don't know what carpet person has like a shiny thing that looks silver. Like, what would be the point? Any tradesman does not have shiny tools. That's not what anybody uses. So I don't know how you would even put that together.
I took that as kind of just like, it goes into like Batman's trying his best, but he's not always perfect. Like, obviously didn't know what that was, but I mean, there's like this theme throughout where Batman, kind of has the wrong piece of the puzzle, or he uses it wrong. We talked about, Alfred and Carmine Falcone earlier about, Falcone tells him this one thing, I'm going to go run off and yell at Alfred about it. But also, you mentioned it earlier with the Penguin chase, they're trying to figure out the stool pigeon thing, and they just like hop from
one bird to
penguin.
The next.
Oh, it's bats have wings too. Oh, falcons have wings. To the next, it just keeps going. So it just, to me, that kind of just resonated with this idea that Batman's just, he's it goes back into that green thing, because the whole movie he's also trying to learn a lesson, that we get, at the very end. But I guess it could be a little hokey. I could see it that way, and I really see like the stool pigeon thing as a little hokey with how many times they got that wrong until they got it right. But I guess at the same time I justify it as kind of tying together in this overarching idea it seems like Matt Reeves was trying to put across.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the action. The action was, there was plenty of it. One of my favorite scenes, and I think a lot of people's favorite scene, is going to be the chase sequence with the Batmobile. The Batmobile gets introduced. He's on a bike the entire movie up until when the Batmobile first appears, and that was really cool. It might be too early to say this, but I'm trying to compare it to anything else, and this might be my favorite Batmobile, quite honestly. I like how it looks like a real car, but it is clearly not a real car. You can tell that Bruce has basically made this thing from scratch, and it's a beast. I mean, it barrels through like a cement water pipe or a sewer pipe, just completely barrels through without any issue. I saw an interview with Matt Reeves. The whole sequence where the Batmobile goes through the flames, that was real. That wasn't CG. He specifically said that they actually filmed that entire sequence where Penguin's in his car and you see the Batmobile coming out through the side mirror. That's 100% real. And I got to say, I mean, I wouldn't have known that if I didn't see that interview. But it reminds me of how in The Dark Knight they did that whole sequence with the semi truck that completely flips because the Bat Pod like hooks it up and links it around the light poles, and it completely flips right in front of the Joker's there, and that was all completely real too. And it reminded me of something like that where like there are directors who still want to try to do stuff that's real, not necessarily computer generated stuff. But the entire sequence was amazing. The rain throughout the entire film adds to everything, but I think it adds the best effect to that entire sequence. From the moment the Batmobile gets introduced at the recycling plant where they're getting the drugs and the money and stuff, to when Batman gets out of the Batmobile and is walking towards Penguin when his car is flipped, the water it makes everything. It gives like a different lens to the entire scene, which I thought was really cool.
The Batmobile scene too. I think that's probably my favorite scene today. I watched the movie again today, and that's the one I really kind of wanted to focus in more on. Just like how one's like he's kind of laughing at the beginning, like he's having a good time. It's a chase, and as it's going, he's like, "Geez, I can't shake this guy." And then finally, he's celebrating when he thinks he's got him blown up, and then the great scene where he's crashing through and the car's flipped and Batman's walking upside down to him. It's just the whole thing was brilliant.
Yeah.
The scene was great. The action was great. The music. I mean, throughout the entire movie, I think the music added so much. But the music on that scene, especially after it flips and he's walking over and you're just hearing those deep, at whatever instrument he's using, like a double bass maybe, those notes that are playing as he like walks over and just like leans down. It's like that was pretty spectacular, and I think that like the music just highlighted that entire thing and like just brought it to a beautiful little like the cherry on top.
I'm not gonna lie, I've been listening to that track specifically on the soundtrack over and over and over again. It's Highway to the Anger Zone is what it's called on the soundtrack, but I would really love to see like a breakdown of the whole sequence from Matt Reeves, because like all the camera rigging and like everything they had to do to like create that intense chase scene, even when he goes into oncoming traffic at one point, like it's just most of it looked like it was real, and so it's just kind of phenomenal. It's very tight framing a lot too, and so it's just like kind of mind-blowing in what they were able to accomplish. I did when the one interview I watched, Matt Reeves did talk about how he was heavily inspired by the French Connection, and I could see that, but it was really cool. But like the action as a whole in the movie is reminded me a lot of like old school Steven Spielberg, where he's not afraid to do longer far away shots to kind of show you the full entirety of the action, and just kind of supplement it with, you know, tight shots of like faces, just to kind of keep the tension up, but without having to like shake it around or like create some kind of like discord, you know, in the framing to like make you think something's exciting going on. So I really appreciated that overall, is that you got like a lens and a view of everything.
I enjoyed the fight sequences. I know some have expressed concern or dislike of the whole bulletproof aspect. You know, he's taking gunfire, point blank range and all. But again, Batfleck, first of all, still best fight sequence of any Batman movie. But the action and the fight scenes in this movie was pretty damn good, and probably more realistic, you know, from the standpoint of, you know, Bruce got taken down a couple of times, you know, to show, hey, as good as he is, he's still mortal as well. So the action, I definitely loved the Batmobile reveal, but I enjoyed the fight sequences as well.
Favorite fight sequences is Batman Goes to the Iceberg Lounge, because I'm kind of a sucker for like when Batman goes into like a club and like the lights are flashing and Batman's just taking people out. He does it in Dark Knight. He does it in the animated series at one point. And that first fight scene was good when he's taking out the twins and he breaks the corrupt cop's nose. I really like that fight scene. That's the first. I think it's the first time we see the grapple gun too.
And I'm assuming the twins were Tweedledee and Tweedledum, right? At least we're to assume that.
Well, that's a good one.
Those guys are destined to work for Two-Face.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about that, but I guess that does lead to the moment at the very end of the film, and this is where I want to wrap up on this one. This kind of leads into ideas of what could happen in the future, but there was at the very end of the film, there's a sequence where Riddler, he realizes his entire plan's been thwarted. He's very upset, but there's a fellow inmate at Arkham who starts talking to him, and he basically says, you know, it's okay. Sometimes, you know, you look like a clown, but Gotham loves a comeback story, and there's a very good chance that, you know, you're just getting started or something on that regards. And then he says, riddle me this. He basically sets it up to say that he can be Riddler's friend. And they don't do a lot of like close up of this character. It's from behind a door the entire time. It's through like either a little section where you can get into the thing, or it's through glass. But the idea is that it's intended to be ambiguous. You're not supposed to see a whole lot. However, you do see somebody who is scarred and has messed up hair. And we know who he's supposed to be based off of interviews that were done that conveniently and stupidly were released by certain media outlets the day the film came out, which I thought was kind of dumb. But put that aside, it was supposed to be the Joker. And I was actually kind of confused because I thought for a brief second up until the point where he started laughing was that it might be Two-Face because of how badly scarred he was. It wasn't the typical Joker where it's a normal face and there's like either something going on with the scars. But in the interview that Matt Reeves gave, he said that the intent with him was that he's not so much, he was born with a condition that makes him permanently smile or something like that. And, but I'm not exactly sure why he was so scarred. But the point is, this character, and this is what I'm wondering, because Matt Reeves had said that there was another sequence they had in the film that they filmed that had Batman visiting Joker and asking him why somebody would be writing him, questioning why Riddler would be writing him specifically. And Joker's like, oh, well, you know, you showed up and you've set off all the freaks coming in. And they cut it out of the film because it didn't really add anything to what they were trying to do. It kind of distracted away from the forward process that they were trying to get. So that scene could end up being the scene that they end up releasing once Rada Alada ends up loading completely, because Matt Reeves did say that they were planning on releasing the scene because they filmed it with Barry, I'm going to say his last name wrong, Keegan or something like that, but he was announced for the film and then he didn't appear. And I kept thinking when I first saw it, I was like, that must have been him, but I didn't see if it really was. The second time I saw the film, I stayed for the credits. And interestingly, he was credited alongside like all the major actors in the beginning of the credits. Not so much like the lineup of all of the credits, but he was listed alongside Jeffrey Wright and Colin Farrell, and I was like, well, clearly he's got a role. So he's going to play some sort of role in the future because they didn't have him cast and have him appear to basically pull a cameo that lasted less than 2 minutes. So, and like I said, we're not trying to get into sequels, but what did you guys think of that sequence? Did you think it took away from kind of the ending moment of the film? Because I've seen some people online say they wish that wasn't there, or I've seen other people say, why did they, it's basically the moments where in Batman Begins, they get the playing card and they say, oh, there's a new person. It's like this, the equivalent of setting things up. And I don't think it's necessarily setting things up for the second film. I feel like it's more of just kind of like a hint as to that there's already people that Batman's taken down, and Joker just happens to be one of them. What did you guys think of that sequence?
Well, I'll first say I was just like you in the beginning of that scene. I thought it was Harvey as well until the end when the laughter started, and it was specifically because of how scarred up he looked. But also, like you, I think something had to be set into place to show that more is coming. If this was going to be a one and done movie, then yeah, I think it's definitely not needed. But just like the card scene at the end of Batman Begins, something had to take place to put out there that there was more to come. In this universe, I was okay with that. But yeah, I'm just like you. I thought it was Harvey in the beginning until the end when he busts out laughing.
I also thought it was Harvey until he started laughing, and I'm totally fine with them like trying to set up for the second film. I would have actually preferred it if they hadn't made it so obvious and they kind of left us guessing like who was that, and perhaps, I don't know, given some clues to lean a few ways or the other. I think that would have kept like a cool mystery. Also, because the Joker has been done so many times. He's so popularly used throughout Batman movies, and they did such a good job taking the Riddler, making him their main villain, that I hope in the next one it's not the Joker as the main villain. Like, show us your creativity again. Give us somebody fresh and new or a fresh iteration. There's so much you can pull from that I think would give a better story than another Joker go-around.
I totally agree, Hannan. I truly hope that they build to the Joker. And I'm going to say this with a little precaution. I don't want Dustin choking me. But I hope they take the Marvel approach in that they don't immediately release the big bad. So we know, at the end of Avengers, we see that Thanos is the big bad, but it takes a while before we get to him. I hope they go a similar route, expand and develop the universe more, show more of the Rogues Gallery, and then, if Joker is to be the big bad of Matt Reeves' universe, then you reveal him after a few more movies. Don't immediately bring him out.
Yeah,
I agree. I would rather see any other characters than the Joker, and admittedly, that's the scene I think about the least from this movie. Like, it's not like I'm gonna say it's, in my opinion, the worst scene in the movie, but I don't mean that as like, oh, it's horrible or terrible. Like, the movie was great. So it's just, to me, it's like it was mostly a nothing scene, and the only really reason why I feel that's in there is, after everything going on, you need to see Riddler react. We need to see like Riddler knowing that, oh, hey, your plan kind of failed because, yeah, bombs did go off, but Batman arrived and him and Catwoman and Gordon took down your stupid gang, so you do need that kind of reaction scene. But yeah, the Joker stuff to me just felt like, filler or just really not important.
knew that actor was in it, and I kept waiting for him to show up. And I know that they announced it that he was playing a cop at some point, right?
Yeah.
I remember there was a online that the actor's brother, like posted like on Facebook or something that he said like, "Haha, my brother's the Joker," and then it was quickly deleted. So when it cut to that scene, and then I heard the voice, I was like, "Oh man, he actually is the Joker, or a young Joker." So I'm gonna see whatever that deleted scene was, where Batman shows up to talk to him about like information that builds on like there's already a past. And I like my Joker showing up as is. I don't need an origin or anything of him falling into chemicals or anything like that.
I will agree that the Joker has been done a lot, and I don't need to see an origin for the Joker. I don't honestly. We don't need anything about the Joker. Everybody knows the Joker. Like, even people who aren't Bat fans know the story of the Joker. They don't need to be shown the Joker's origin again, or have the Joker be the main villain for an entire film. They don't need that. We've seen that so many times, and I'm not saying that is anything against the Joker. I appreciate the villain of the Joker, but I think that there are so many other villains that I would rather see get a film, be the main villain in a film that we have yet to see, even ones that have yet to be even in a live action film. There's so many other villains that have not had the chance to really shine. And then there's villains who have had a chance to shine, but still kind of need a reboot of sorts when it comes to people understanding who the character is. I mean, like, Poison Ivy is a great character. The film that she was in wasn't exactly great. Mr. Freeze is a great character that could be redone. I mean, there's still lots of other characters out there that have yet to, really flourish. But there's all kinds of other characters out there too that could make an appearance in any of these films. They hinted at Hush as a possibility. They hinted at, surprisingly, there's one Easter egg that Scott and I talked about when we left the theater, which was when he gets knocked out by the shotgun blast and then Catwoman helps him back on, there's a whole sequence where he grabs a vial, has a special spot in his suit to put it in, and no joke, it looked green. And there's only one green liquid that we know, in the DC universe of what it can be.
No one's talking about that at all. That's crazy.
Nobody. Yes, exactly. That's what's really strange is that, he puts it in, and you could assume, okay, it's adrenaline because of that, but why is it green if it's just adrenaline? And the fact that he gets so violent once he takes it leads me to believe that it's Venom. And there's a great story out there, Batman Venom, for those of you who, anybody who sees my picture online, my avatar literally comes from that storyline. It's when Bruce takes Venom as a way to basically help enhance his fight on crime. And he gets addicted to it. But in the film, nobody's talking about that. I've seen 2 different Easter egg videos on YouTube, for big ones that are getting like massive amounts of views, and neither one of them mention the vial of liquid that he stabs into his leg to basically get him to be able to, save Catwoman from the attack. So that's interesting. Not to say that they're necessarily setting up Bane, because if that exists already, then there's a possibility that that's already happened and they don't need to do Bane. Similar to the way they don't need to show the Joker's origin and that kind of stuff, because that's the one convenient thing about not starting at square one or year one with Batman, because you can already have Batman have taken down certain characters, and you don't have to you can just say that he's already dealt with them. You don't have to start at the very beginning and say, well, when would he have ever done that? Because we saw when he became Batman. Well, no, we didn't. We didn't see when he became Batman. We started off with year 2, which means he had plenty of other things he did prior to that. So there's a lot of interesting things. I want to kind of wrap up the episode here, though. Like I said, next episode we're going to be talking a little bit more. Well, I say this, but let's be honest. If RadaAlada.com updates and it ends up being that sequence that we think it might be with the Joker, we might end up talking about sequels next week. But leading up into the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about 2 different topics. We might vice versa them depending on when exactly certain things is released. But we're going to be talking about sequels and what the future holds for the franchise based off of what we've seen in the film. More Easter eggs and hints that we've slightly talked about here. We're also going to be doing a deep dive into some of the comics that this connects to, because there's a lot of different comics, a lot of big comics, a lot of well-known comic stories that this film pulls from, which is greatly appreciated for comic fans, and it'll be interesting to see if everyone's figured out some of the comics that some of these things have been pulled from. So we'll be discussing that as well. And then sometime in April, The Art of Batman comes out, which is it's a new book that's releasing that focuses on like concept art and design elements for the actual film. We're going to be diving into that book to kind of look at a lot of different ideas that they had when they were creating the film. But unfortunately, that book's not actually releasing until April 19th, so we won't be able to do that until after the book releases. But once it does release, we'll be talking about that. So at least for the next 2 weeks, we'll be talking about the comic connections and sequel and future ideas for the film franchise. But outside of that, we might have other topics that might come up too. And if you guys have topics that you guys like us to discuss on future episodes, be sure to let us know either on the comment section. You can send us an email at tbu@thebatmanuniverse.net, or you can leave comments on our Discord under the TBU podcast channel. So outside of that, be sure to check out our website for all kinds of news related to movies, television, merchandise, video games, comics, and everything else related to the Bat fandom. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, YouTube, and you can send us an email, like I said, at tbu@thebatmanuniverse.net. All of our social links, as well as links to support the website and the podcast, can be found over at thebatmanuniverse.net. With all of that being said, for Theo, BJ, Hannan, and Scott, and myself, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the TBU podcast. We will see you guys next time.